This is the winged victory of Samothrace, also known as Nike or Nike. That's actually where the sneaker brand takes their name. Nike is the ancient Greek goddess of victory. She did originally have a head and arms. Unfortunately, they do not survive. Just to give you an idea, the winged sculpture herself, without head, today is 8 feet tall. She is enormous. And even missing her head and arms, look at the drama and the grace and the elegance. She has just swept down from the sky. Her base is the prow of a warship. She is just hovering. She's just about to touch down. The wind is blowing against her. Her wings are fluttering. The sea spray is soaking her dress, leaving nothing to the imagination. Can you see her belly button in her thin drapery? We call this the wet drapery look. You will see that Greek sculptures during this period, it actually already starts in the classical period, that women's dresses, you can see right through them, and we call this the wet drapery look. Isn't she just absolutely glorious and completely over the top magnificent? So originally, this sculpture stood on top of a cliff above a theater on an island. So ships passing by from the sea would have been able to see her. She definitely commemorates a naval victory because she's standing on the prow of a warship. We unfortunately have not been able to narrow down quite which naval victory it is. There's a few possibilities. But we do know that she was commissioned by a Hellenistic king or queen to commemorate a victory. But you can see just how magnificently over the top and action-packed Hellenistic art can be. No matter what angle you look at her from, she's never quite the same. Do you see those dramatic diagonals, the twisting and turning of her body? Look at how her drapery flutters and swirls and twirls behind her. You're invited to walk around her and just see her from all angles. It's idealized, it's naturalistic, it's celebrating the human body, it's celebrating her glorious beauty, but it's really very different from classical art, isn't it? It's just so gloriously dramatic and over the top. This sculpture was also very influential on later art. If you've ever looked at the hood ornament of, say, a Rolls Royce, it's a very stylized representation of her. Things like, I believe it's the Golden Globes, are a very stylized representation of her. All sorts of victory sculptures in more modern times, even World War I monuments for the fallen sort of are inspired by this magnificent sculpture. So she's just rather extra. I can't help but get very excited about this sculpture because she's just so dramatic and over the top. She lives in the Louvre in Paris now, and she's right at the top of a dramatic staircase. So she's no longer on top of a cliff, but she still gets to rather dominate the audience today. Let's go back to Pergamon once more. We're lucky that because Pergamon was up on a hill, when the city was eventually abandoned, it wasn't redeveloped. So a lot more survives here than at other sites. And maybe because Pergamon was smaller than other kingdoms, it had to overcompensate a bit. So this is another victory monument from Pergamon. This one is known as the Great Altar of Pergamon, and the monument that the dying Gaul was part of was actually just around the corner from it. It is really, really big. Originally, it would have stood outside. Unfortunately, the Germans ran off with it about 120 years ago. So originally, it would have been in what is now Turkey. And the Germans packed it up and took it back to Germany. And it's now set up inside a museum. It was originally an enclosure, so if you had gone up those, so it would have been outside, if you'd gone up those stairs and gone through those doorways, you would have actually been in a courtyard that would have had another altar inside it. So basically just the facade has been reconstructed inside the museum. So you can see those are steps, and there's these over life-sized reliefs that run around the walls of it that are in this incredibly deep carving with these really wonderful dramatic figures. They're unfortunately fragmentary, so some of the figures are really well preserved, some of the figures unfortunately got destroyed completely. And it's this incredibly dramatic, what we call a gigantomachy. It's from ancient Greek myth, and it's a battle between the Greek gods and this sort of generation of beings that came before them, known as the giants or the titans, some of who were very monstrous and somewhat unpleasant. So basically it was this battle between the Greek gods and these giants for supremacy. And this was also a victory monument. And the style and the carving of this is absolutely spectacular. I don't know how well you can see it, but if you look at the steps, do you see how the figures are actually spilling right off the walls onto the steps of the altar? That's how deep and three-dimensional the carving is. And there's these really deep diagonal and X compositions. The faces are incredibly dramatic and expressive. And you're going to see too that the body types are very, very muscular with these very exaggerated expressions and gestures as well. It's incredibly extravagant and wonderfully over the top. It is just fabulously Hellenistic. So let's go and look at a detail of the Great Altar. So here's one of the sections of the Great Altar. So the figures are over life-sized. And if you look at the male figure on the left, you can see that really super exaggerated muscular body type that he has that is quite different from the classical. And look at his face too. Do you see those really deep cut eyes, that really deeply emotional face that suggests suffering and torment, and that slightly opened mouth, and the curls that are sort of spilling out of his face? So that character is Alcyoneos. He's one of the giants. You can see he has those wings. The woman grabbing him by the hair is Athena. Sadly, her face is lost, but you can see she has her long dress. Do you see that slightly scaly piece of armor that she has? That is the face of Medusa, that special piece of armor. She has her shield. Then you see the woman sort of floating towards her on wings. That is Nike, the winged victory again. In fact, if you compare her to the winged victory of Samothrace, who we're just looking at, there's quite a bit of similarity between them. And then that you notice there's a figure on a larger scale that seems to be growing out of the earth. She only goes to just about below her breasts. That is Ge. You can actually see her name painted in red Greek letters. That is Earth. Her face is damaged too, but you see she too has those really deep cut, tormented, suffering eyes. Do you see she has one hand stretched up? She has one arm stretched up towards Athena as if begging for mercy. She has that wild, tousled, snake-like hair. And Athena, Alkinoos, the one she has grabbed, Alkinoeos, I can never pronounce his name, my apologies. The guy she's grabbed by her hair, do you notice he's actually got counter pressure on her arm and he's actually stretching his hand out towards Gay? He is actually Gay's son. You'll see too that there's a lot of snaky activity going on here. And there's two interpretations about the snakes. Now, this is the battle between the gods and the giants. The gods are the good guys. The giants are these sort of primordial monsters that fought the gods for supremacy. Alkyoneos is one of the more normal looking ones. A lot of his brothers and sisters are part snake, part monster, and it's possible that the snakes are part of him, that they're actually growing out of his back somewhere. I have also heard interpretations that the snake is actually helping Athena, which would explain why it appears to be biting him. It might actually be one of his limbs that is biting him in confusion. I have actually heard both of those interpretations. So Gay is his mother, and she's actually trying to plead with Athena for mercy. So Athena is actually, do you notice the incredible movement in Athena? Look how deeply cut her clothing is. You see how it's swooshing in the wind as she's running past? He's trying to move away from her. He's incredibly powerful, isn't he? But she's running past. She's basically grabbed him by the hair. She's just whooshing past him, just grabbing him right off his feet. And it's an incredibly violent battle that is raging all around us here. What's eventually going to happen is that the Greek gods are going to defeat the giants and they're going to imprison them inside the earth, Gay, their mother. And every once in a while they rampage to escape, and that is when we get earthquakes. But you can see how this is typically Hellenistic, from the drama and the diagonals, and look at the incredibly deep carved relief. And I absolutely love how this spills out onto the staircase as well.